Love with me on the grass. Lose the stop from your throat. Not words, not music or rhyme I want. No costume or lecture, not even the best. Only the lull I like. The hum of your valved voice. I mind how we lay in June, such a transparent summer morning. You settled your head athwart my hips and gently turned over upon me, unparted the shirt from my bosom bone, and plunged your tongue to my bare-stripped heart, and reached till you felt my beard, and reached till you held my feet. Hello everybody, I'm Roxy and this is recmebooks. Today I bring you a very special book tag in which I was tagged by its creator, Mark Nash. I was so happy to be tagged on this because it's such an amazing tag. It's all about finding quotes you disagree with and explaining why. Or not necessarily disagree, but you're just meant to engage with the quotes and be a bit contrarian. I thought it was great, and I will of course link Mark Nash's video down below. He talks about different quotes and thoughts regarding death from the Oxford Book of Death, I think, and it's wonderful, so go check that out right after this video. I, being especially contrarian, started with a quote I actually love just because I wanted to share it, but also because I needed to tell the story. So in my April TBR, link down below, I mentioned loving Whitman in spite of not having studied him very much. And I actually, by the time I got to my poetry course, I already loved him. And the story of how I became like fully aware of his poetry is that I was reading a fan fiction, which is something I used to do a lot and now I do sometimes. And the premise was that the two protagonists went to a bookshop, one of these wonderful cafe indie bookshops. One of them gets a Whitman book of poetry because he really likes Whitman, and they are in the car, they are drinking this wonderful cup of coffee, and he starts talking about Whitman, one of them, and reciting his poetry. The way it's described, I remember it as being very intense, and also just the lines that I just read. As a teen, I had never read something that felt so sensuous, but at the same time so poetic. Back then, it really changed a lot of perceptions I had about literature and poetry. And so after finishing that fanfic, I went and read some of myself. And so that's the story of that quotation. I hope you enjoyed that. Let's move on. This is from Sheila Heti's Motherhood. I tapped a lot of things that I did agree with or that I found interesting, but there is one aspect that I just disagreed. Time is always ticking for women, whereas men apparently live in a timeless realm. In the dimension of men, there is no time, just space. Imagine living in the realm of space, not time. You put your dick into spaces, and the bigger your dick, the cozier the space. I just don't think it's true, you see, because I think time is something that you either feel the pressure of or you don't. And some things can, of course, prompt it. But I feel like people who feel it, like I very much do, in spite of a lot of logical arguments against that fear of the time passing or fear of wasting time, will feel it either way. And this is something that happens a lot throughout the book because she's so pressed about motherhood that she so often overextend her claims. Of course, women have physical limitations regarding the age in which they can have children. Although I would think that most 70-year-old men, in spite of being capable of fathering children, would still have claims about child rearing, but that's another topic. To her, this seems to be like the only factor in life. I don't know. It's a very interesting relationship she has with motherhood. But yeah, what do you think? I think time as a concern is not gendered. Maybe it's expressed in a different way, but concerns with time related to other factors that are more important. And also there are a lot of men whose body of work is in relation to time and how fleeting life is. And I talked about this book in my March wrap-up, link down below. I said I enjoyed this book, and I did. It just seems like I didn't because I chose something I didn't like about it. Now I want to discuss a quote from my year of relaxation, which will pop up in my April wrap-up, but I don't know if it will be a DNF or not. That's all I'll say for now. But there was one quote that I did really connect to, so it's not really a contrarian quote, I guess. Anyways, I think this is interesting. Oh, sleep. Nothing else could ever bring me such pleasure, such freedom, the power to feel and move and think and imagine, safe from the miseries of my waking consciousness. I was not a narcoleptic. I never fell asleep when I didn't want to. I was more of a somniac, a somnophile. I'd always loved sleeping. It was one thing my mother and I had enjoyed doing together when I was a child. She was not the type to sit and watch me draw, to read me books, or play games, or go for walks in the park, or bake brownies. We got along best when we were asleep. That's how I imagine this character talks. Very dull. That was interesting for me because I have a very tense relationship with sleep. I am prone to nightmares or just very vivid dreams in general that are exhausting. I suffer often from sleep paralysis. It was so bad that when I was younger, my parents did take me to a sleep clinic, but they didn't find anything structurally wrong with my brain. So, I've tried a lot of different approaches to sleeping better throughout the years, sometimes where I just gave up and didn't sleep, that sort of tense relationship. I also kind of wish I didn't have to sleep. I would be so happy. And this is related to the thing with time. For me, every day just goes by so fast. Now, when I do look back to those times where I've slept really, really well, I kind of crave it, but when I get to my bed, it's like, nope, I want to read instead. This is how I am. I'm not asking anyone to fix me. Again, trying my best to have a healthier attitude towards sleep, but so far, I don't think I'm being very successful. And I don't think I'm a somnophile at all. Okay, I have one quote from a book that I do not have here in my possession at the moment. So I'm just going to read it off my computer. This is from Junichiro Tanizaki's In Praise of Shadows, which is a fabulous essay on traditional Japanese aesthetics. As you know, I love Japanese aesthetics. One of my favorite books is Donald Keen's The Pleasures of Japanese Literature. But one aspect that I thought was very interesting was that he talks about feminine beauty, and he doesn't really question how females might have been affected by what I'm going to read now. Our ancestors made of woman an object inseparable from darkness, like lacquerware decorated in gold or mother of pearl. They hid as much of her as they could in shadows, concealing her arms and legs in the folds of long sleeves and skirts, so that one part and one only stood out: her face. That's the quote I chose to highlight. There are some other sections that talk about also onagaras and kabuki and that sort of relationship with femininity in Japan. I have been fascinated by this idea of the muse since a very young age. I really identified with this idea of the artist having a muse. But then I started to really question these gazes. And the same here. I think though I love Japanese art and Japanese literature, there has been a huge cultural and personal toll for the whole female sex. They were expected to be a certain way, and now that they are not behaving a certain way, and we can see that a lot in the literature that even as foreigners we are accessing through translations, women are rebelling, society is kind of undergoing a huge shift, and I'm kind of following that as much as I've been able to from the literary perspective. I'm not an expert by any means, but I think it's an interesting thing to consider, especially in a country like Japan, which is so rich in its history and aesthetics, but at what cost, if that makes sense. Finally, I have a quote from one of my favorite books, and that is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is from the prologue. In case you are not familiar with the story, this was first published censored in a magazine called Lipping Cuts. It was immediately flagged as immoral, not only because it's very heavy, homoerotic, let's call it subtext, but also because it's of course very decadent. Although it's interesting because you might argue that in the end it's actually quite a moral book. But anyways, in order to defend the book, Oscar Wilde wrote a very famous prologue that you're often made to read on literary theory courses, and the main argument there is not that the book is not immoral, it's that that just doesn't matter. I could read the whole thing, but I will spare you and only read a couple of lines. Those who find ugly meanings in beautiful things are corrupt without being charming. This is a fault. Those who find beautiful meanings in beautiful things are the cultivated. For these there is hope. They are the elect to whom beautiful things mean only beauty. There is no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. Books are well written or badly written. That is all. Like many people, I read this when I was a teenager for the first time. I read the book, not me. I was only a teenager once. I was at the perfect age to clap at this and think, yes, yes. I was also very taken with the beats. I was that kind of teen. As I grew up, I started to question those ideas because, of course, it's easy to pardon things that challenge morality when they are 100 years old. But what happens when those things are being written right now? On the other hand, I do not wish to live in a world where we are filled with art that is just moral or that only tries to posit positive things. I struggle a lot with the ethics of art because part of me feels that art should be a free-range space, but also, and especially as a woman, I know how often art has been the excuse of powerful men to inflict pain on women, and not only women, of course, but especially women. So I go back and forth. I also am a big proponent of the arts for art's sake movement. I don't think art needs to be just one thing. I don't think embracing arts for art's sake and for aesthetic experience means getting rid of all political art or saying art can't also be political. And I also think that appreciating art for its own beauty and taking the time to appreciate that aesthetic experience can be very political in such a utilitarian age. So it's hard for me to really draw a line that works for every single work of art. It's just interesting. It's something that I think about often. It's one of the reasons I'm so drawn to works that explore these relationships. And so, yeah, that is the picture of Dorian Gray. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video. It's kind of a different video, more rambly than I usually allow myself to be, although I am very rambly, but if you knew me in person, you would know this is nothing. I will link everything I mentioned down below. I now include all the books I've mentioned at the end after my social media. And of course, follow me on Bookstagram, follow me on my blog. I did end up uploading the Being Various favorite stories review, so I will also link that down below. And tell me, is there a quote that you've read in a book that you have like despised? Not necessarily the book, but just like the quote, or maybe also the book. I don't know. Just write it down below. I am not going to tag anyone in particular because I don't know who would be interested in doing such a video. But if you are, please feel free to do it and consider yourself tagged and mention that down below and I'll go watch it. And that's it. See you next time. I will link the